without a lick of money, better than blessed man. Had all I ever wanted. I got everything I need. I got everything I need. Got love and a family. Jesus, how I trust Him, how I'm through Him holding on. Jesus, Jesus, precious Jesus, oh, for to trust Him more. Tis so sweet to trust you, Jesus, just to take Him at His word, just to.
Richard Engel joins us tonight live on the ground in Kharkiv. Good evening, Richard.
Good evening. There were multiple Russian attacks across Ukraine today, and the air raid sirens here in Kharkiv are continuing into the night, which is a main reason why many Ukrainians don't agree with President Trump that there is no need for a ceasefire.
Across Ukraine, Russia launched what seemed like indiscriminate attacks against civilians and vital infrastructure, targeting the power grid in the south, a university in the north, shops and residences in central Ukraine, and out east in Kharkiv. We arrived at an apartment building shortly after it was pummeled by Russian drones. President Putin says Russia never attacks civilian targets in Ukraine, but survivors tell us this building, clearly full of families, was hit by a barrage of Russian drones, each exploding 30 seconds apart, suggesting it was deliberately targeted.
And even as they are still looking for survivors here, the air raid sirens have gone off once again, meaning that a Russian attack is possibly inbound right now.
Alexander told me he, his wife, and 5-year-old son were sleeping when the drone struck before sunrise, causing a gas leak and fire. They barely escaped alive.
Considering what just happened to you and your family, what do you think about the talks today between President Trump and President Zelensky to reach some sort of peace agreement with Russia?
I just wish it could end sooner, he says, because of things like this. 7 people were killed here, 18 injured, including me. I just want it all to end as quickly as possible. One body was wrapped in blankets amid the debris. Among the dead was a 1.5-year-old girl, her grandmother and parents, with an entire family wiped out in an attack we happened to witness. It's little surprise Ukrainians want a peace deal, security guarantees, and a ceasefire. Richard Engel, NBC News.
We thank you for watching. And remember...
All right, good evening, everybody, and welcome to what we've called Woodmont Live, for lack of a better word, but welcome tonight to those of you that are here and online. We have with us, again, who's been our guest many times over the years, Samar Ali. She is a research professor. Yeah, welcome, Samar.
Thank you. Hi, guys. Hi.
She's a research professor at Vanderbilt. She is the president and CEO of Millions of Conversations and she is one of the co-chairs, along with John Meacham and Bill Haslam, of the American Project on Unity and American Democracy. And so tonight, we're having a forum to talk about the two wars that continue on in our world, the Russia-Ukraine war and also the conflict in Gaza. So, Samar, welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
Always good to have you. Always good to hear your perspective. And so let's dive in. And I know you've got a lot to say. So
I always think we should maybe, I can't believe I'm telling you this, we should do a prayer. Maybe we should do a prayer
I can
for
do a
peace.
prayer.
I was thinking that as I was driving over
We
here.
usually pray at the end. But
Okay, I think we need one before.
Let's do a prayer. All right. Loving God, thank you for tonight. Thank you for Samar and her commitment to peace and justice and conversation and just for all that she does in our community and beyond. Be with us tonight as we talk about these hard and sensitive topics. And we do pray for peace. And we pray for an end to these conflicts in Christ's name. Amen.
Thank you.
So last Friday, there was a summit held in Alaska between President Trump and Vladimir Putin. That was followed up on Monday by a, summit or meeting at the White House with President Zelensky, President Trump, and many European leaders just a couple of days ago. So let me just start by asking you, where do things stand right now?
Well, I will start by asking a question to the audience, because you guys always get to ask me questions, and now I want to ask you all a question to start. So I'm going to switch this up a little bit than I normally do. And that is, how many of you all feel overwhelmed? And feel overwhelmed by this conversation even, that, and the news and et cetera. So most people's hands are going up. So I will just say that this is a very overwhelming moment. You know, I had a call this morning from someone who self-identifies as a Republican diehard, who is a lawyer as well, who asked me, you know, out of the blue, called me and I said, "How are you doing?" And I sort of said, "I'm overwhelmed." You know, that was my immediate response. And he said, "Overwhelmed in a good way, overwhelmed in a bad way?" And I was like, "I'm just overwhelmed." So I'm analyzing all of this, I'm processing all of this in real time, and I'm constantly and consistently being asked, you know, because of what I do, about what's happening. And there is that overwhelming sense for a number of different reasons, including the process, because there's so much happening at once. So having identified that, what I will say is I think that NBC clip that you just showed captures a lot of the emotion that's being dealt with here right now, including people who are trying to figure out, what does this summit even mean? What do these peace deal negotiations even mean? And I think that as somebody who is a peacemaker, who studies positive peace versus negative peace deal making, and et cetera, I've never had so many people around the world want to have a conversation in my lifetime about peace and what it actually means. So I think like there is that as a start. And so there's that. And then who gets to determine and decide the terms of a peace deal? And so I think what a lot of people are struggling with right now, and everyday people are struggling with right now, is it actually peace that is being negotiated, or is it a surrender? Okay? And so, and what is the difference between those two? And does peace require surrendering? And I think these are the conversations, you know, I run an organization called Millions of Conversations for a reason, because I believe in democracy. That's why I do the project on unity and democracy with our co-chairs, Meacham and former Governor Haslam, because I feel like democracy is best when we're able to have these types of conversations to figure out what to do. That's one of the reasons I also believe so much in the dialogue that Woodmont Live has and brings, so that we can figure out these very complicated issues that I think many people are surprised we're having to deal with in our lifetime, quite frankly. So I will just say this. What do I think it means, the summit? Well, I spoke to a couple of European colleagues from the UK and Ireland just yesterday, and last week from France and the Netherlands and Switzerland, and everybody there is pretty terrified. And what one European colleague said from Ireland was, things have changed between U.S. and European relations after the Friday summit. We no longer know if the U.S. is with us. We no longer know if we share the same values. And you're about to give you, and he said not you personally, but your home country, he made that differentiation, are about to give away half of Ukraine pretty much to Russia. And the rest of us in Europe are not okay with that. We're not quite sure what that means for us. And these tariffs that are being, so it's all kind of, and then he started talking about the tariffs and et cetera. So what does the summit mean? I think we don't yet know. And I think, but he also said, well, let's see what ends up happening, because who knows where this is all going. And if you look at the terms that Putin is asking for, it's basically looks a lot like a surrender. And what I mean by surrender specifically is a removal of Zelensky, demilitarization of the military in Kyiv, and an annexation of more of Ukraine as well, and a refusal of NATO member, just not even, he doesn't have the power to, to dictate the terms of a NATO membership for Ukraine, but Trump has made it very clear that that's off the table. And that, if you recall, was one of the main things that led to the start of this conflict to begin with, or this war.
So say a little more about the kind of moving from last Friday, where it was just Trump and Putin, to then all of a sudden Monday, where it's Trump, Zelensky, and the European leaders. A lot of us have watched news and read articles, but what do you think that meeting was like Monday?
Well, this is so my conversation with European colleagues who are very close to and advise European politicians, including heads of state, that was the conversation. It's Wednesday. We had that conversation yesterday afternoon, after Monday's meeting. So what I would say is that what people are confused, and they don't quite yet know how to engage. There's been almost, for the most part, on and off, but 8 decades of consistent diplomatic attempts at resolving conflict that doesn't just use the strong man approach. And that we've now shifted into that, and what people are starting to, that are leaders in this position, they're saying, okay, what does diplomacy even mean and look like in this new era? And are we officially in a new era and is the new era looking more like the first half of the 20th century than the second half?
What do you think the people that you know and have talked to from the European side, what do they want? What do they think should happen? I mean, I know it might be different person to person, but they are not for a surrender. But at the end of the day, I think what I want to talk about tonight is this has been going on for 3.5 years. Is that right? And so what are they saying that they want?
Well, it was so interesting, is if you recall, we had this conversation together almost 3.5 years ago, of where we talked about what would a ceasefire arrangement look like, and what would it take, and remember we had that conversation right then and there. And then it was like, remember the scenario where I said it might end up like this, and we have to ask the question, then therefore, is it worth, what is required of us if we don't want it to be that way, and et cetera. So I think what a lot of Europeans feel is abandonment. And they have, from what, we have our whole pledge to listen thing, so I do a lot of listening. When I'm listening very closely, I can't necessarily relate to some of my colleagues in Poland, the way in which they talk about their fear of Russia because of their geographic proximity. But I know, in listening to them, that it is a genuine, I'm not saying that I don't fear Russian military strength in the world, but I'm saying it's not geographically as close as it is for Europeans who are living there. And what I say is that they're saying we thought we were on this democracy train together. We thought that we were sharing values and principles that adhered to the Geneva Convention, and that we're going to stand up to bullies when people were being bullied. And now what we're seeing is that it's a little bit like every country for themselves. So what does NATO even mean moving forward? Are we in this together, or has something changed?
Fair. What is if Ukraine were to agree to a peace deal? What has to happen within the Ukrainian government for that to happen? Like, there's a lot of talk about people are negotiating Ukraine on behalf of Ukraine. What has to happen in Ukraine for them to approve or even consider a peace deal, or so would maybe call a surrender of certain territories? But you know more about the Ukrainian government and how that works. What would have to happen?
Well, I think, there's a statement that Trump made back in February in the Oval Office to Zelensky with Vice President Vance there, that I was surprised more people didn't, and by people, I was surprised more mainstream media pundits didn't pick up on. And I don't mean that term negatively. I'm just using it for the term to apply. And that was, you don't have the cards. Remember, he kept saying to Zelensky, you don't have the cards. You don't have the cards. And so I think that in essence, he's saying you don't have the cards. And so you don't have the cards to do what it is that you say that you want to do. And we're not going to put boots on the ground. And so as a result in that, what does that then therefore mean for Ukraine if you don't have let me give an analogy real quick. So when Russia went in and helped Assad against the opposition in Syria 10 years ago, 10 years prior after the chemical weapons attack, about 6 months to 1 year after that, and we did not step in and provide the level of military support that would have been needed to counter the Assad regime with Russian and Iranian-backed support, the opposition lost ground for the next 10 years and basically had to cede to the Assad regime. So if you look at this, does Ukraine have a choice? And I guess that's what is its pathway? And this is what I think a lot of European leaders are asking right now. What is its pathway to holding on to the terms of a true peace deal that Ukraine would feel is fair and then it could live with if it doesn't have continuous U.S. support that challenges the Russian military?
Can you elaborate on the difference between a peace deal and a ceasefire?
Yeah, so a ceasefire leads to a peace deal.
Okay.
So that's the thing. And it's become this term that I feel like there's been just a lot of drama around, if you will. I don't mean to I just think that, but as we've used the term ceasefire forever, really, to cease fire. So you cease fire to try to resolve the conflict, and you've reached an agreement on the terms that would then lead to a permanent peace deal. So a ceasefire is arguably temporary if it doesn't lead to a permanent peace deal and arrangement. So you also, though, have peace deals that don't always hold and don't always work. But typically, let's say you have a ceasefire and you're trying to negotiate terms to get to a peace deal, and within 3 months' time, 6 months' time, 9 months' time, 1 year, you don't move from that ceasefire into the peace deal arrangement, the ceasefire is likely going to break.
Let's talk about Vladimir Putin a little bit. What do you think he wants? Do you think that ultimately one thing that President Trump said a long time ago, and I don't understand this at all, and I don't know how Republicans or Democrats could understand this, is that Ukraine started the war or was responsible for the war.
Right.
That doesn't make any sense, right? We all know that Russia invaded Ukraine. But what do you think Putin wants? Would he be okay with a peace deal where he gets part of the territory, or is he just glad to be back on the world stage in negotiations with the President of the United States, whereas he was kind of siloed and put off for a long time, and now all of a sudden he's back in the game? What does Samar Ali think that Putin wants at this point?
Well, I'm not a Putin expert, And what I mean by that is that I have
good thing.
No. So, I mean, sometimes you need to, what I will say is that I have read a lot about Putin, including his own autobiography that he wrote 25 years ago. And I was surprised, I might have mentioned this before to you all, I think it's called In My Own Words, but I was surprised how much he revealed in that autobiography. And it struck me, but of course, 25 years in the position that he's been in is going to also change a person too. And just recognizing that they will tend to become more paranoid. They will tend to resort. Typically, it can go either way. Typically, you'll see people soften, and sometimes you'll see people harden, depending on the circumstances and et cetera. So what I will say is what I'm seeing is a strong man sort of vision that that's the only way to have power, and that it's the bigger and the stronger and the more powerful I am, the more I'm going to be able to control and I'm going to be able to get. And so then therefore that is what I must be. And talking about anything other than that is a waste of time. And so norms have shifted. I mean, you might have heard me, and I'll just kind of go back into it again because I think it's relevant, of what happened when there was a red line that we stated in 2013 in Syria that if Assad crossed, we would go in and enforce that red line. We didn't do it. That was a signal to Russia that we didn't have the appetite to enforce these red lines. And then Crimea was annexed, and Russia then went in and provided air support to Syria. And that was the chain of events. And until then, Russia was basically staying out of it. It saw an opening of our own appetite for how much we would be willing to enforce our own norms that we were even setting on the global stage. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I think he's reacting also to the moment while also trying to create moments for himself. And I don't think he wants, I mean, this is now stating the absolute obvious. I think he wants as much control over Ukraine as possible. And I think he wants to also not be seen as, I think he wants to be seen as a very, especially in the eyes of Russians and Russian people living there, as the strong man on the world stage.
Which he hasn't had for some time, but seems to be reclaiming.
Yeah, he talks about in that book, that autobiography, how basically humiliated he felt when the Berlin Wall came down. And he was in Berlin at the time. And so he was in Germany, and he was with the KGB, and his entire identity was KGB, and it was there. Oh.
Yeah, you're get your hair off of there.
Thanks, guys.
All right, now let's do this. This is a dangerous question.
Oh, gosh.
Let's try to get into the mind of Donald Trump, which is really hard to do. It seems to me, and you tell me if you agree or disagree, he wants to cut a deal, which seems to involve some type of surrender of the territory that's been talked about a lot recently, which basically Russia has control of some of it, Donbass, and Ukraine still is putting up a fight, right? What does Trump want?
I think so. Again, I'm not a Trump expert, but I would say I have heard that what he's interested in, I mean, I've heard a lot of different things, and I'm sure we all have, right? I mean, everybody's heard of different things, but I'd say one thing I've heard is that he really wants he wants a Nobel Peace Prize. I think he wants to be known for being an effective deal maker who is able to, he uses that word peace in, again, I think a very loose kind of way. As well, if you kind of look underneath the details of what's going into these quote unquote peace deals. But everything is a peace deal. And I think that, though, at the same time, what I will say is this is going to, I think, surprise a lot of people, what I'm about to say. But I have been told by people who are very close to him and from confirmed sources that he really does not like violence. And that he has Yeah, I told you it's going to surprise you. Doesn't like violence.
Doesn't like violence.
I know that's going to surprise a lot of people in terms of seeing pictures of dead children and seeing pictures of dead people does influence him in a way that it moves him and that he looks to say. And now this is the other thing too. And I could be totally wrong. And people who are, who are close to him could be totally wrong as well. But one of the things that they'll say is that he does not want, if he can look for a quick solution to stop war, he's going to go for it, even if it doesn't lead to a permanent peace solution. So he uses a lot of these tactics sometimes to buy time. And so somebody said to me the other day, like, he's buying time right now. What he's doing is buying time. And so the question, I think, is, okay, let's say those are his instincts. What are some of his other instincts as well? I think he cares a lot about what people who have been loyal supporters of him think about things. I think he also cares a lot about what people who he would say he needs, also that he financially needs, or maybe potentially have information or on him, or et cetera, et cetera. Those are all things that are coming into play here, into this decision-making tree that I think we will be studying for years, especially historians will be studying for years to try to understand what did influence Donald Trump and in some of the decisions that he made at different times and at different points in his first term and now in his second term.
So one of the questions, back to the diplomacy conversation, and this is my observation, that maybe Trump set up the Alaskan summit because he'd been frustrated with European leaders, and he was like, and I'm going to get a summit between me and Putin. He tends to like those kind of things, right, on the world stage. He's done it before with Kim Jong-un and other people. But what are the odds of the United States and Zelensky and all the European leaders actually finding a path forward? Because my take is that this administration, they obviously say this war did not start on our watch. It started under the last administration, and now we're trying to end it. I mean, that you hear that time and time again, right? So they're trying to take the lead on ending it, whatever ending it looks like. But how do you get to a place where everybody's at the table, and what are the odds that everybody's going to agree on the next step? That's at the heart of diplomacy, but it's hard.
Yeah, well, I think part of the question is what leverage do they have? And what is their power in this current environment? And I think, like, you hear and you see, I was just in Paris, France's economy is not what it once was. And the tariffs are going to make it likely weaker. And so if you look at this, and I've been told that the United Kingdom's economy is suffering. I've been told by a number of British people that they are not as optimistic about the future as they once were. And so you have these different elements at play. So there's what you want, and then there's the reality. So how do you match the reality with what you want? And I think a lot of people who want peace that's anchored in fairness and justice and equality and the principles that are underlying of what we call democracy are struggling to figure out, how do we actually achieve that if we don't have power? And I think we are even having these conversations in the United States right now, which is just sort of saying, like, we want to be moving in this direction, and we're here right now. So how do we actually do that? And we're so fragmented. So how do we actually get from here to there? And that's what we want. So in Europe, I think it's like, okay, so what are they going to do without us? What are they going to actually be able to do without us? Are they ready and able to take on Russia for Ukraine? And so their discussions right now are who is going to commit peacekeeping troops right now. So that's the discussion in Europe, not military, peacekeeping troops. And I'm not putting down peacekeeping troops. I'm just simply saying this is where the discussion is. And there are people who, you're not seeing a flood of European countries even putting their hands up to saying we're going to commit peacekeeping troops. And I think that Trump and Putin know this, and they're like, okay, you might want that, but how much are you willing to put on the table for that? And that's been consistently Trump's message, whether we like it or not, with regards to the United Nations as well. I mean, going back to 2016, I think this is the other thing too, with regards to the United Nations, and that is if we are weakening our commitment to the United Nations, what takes its place? Have we determined what takes its place? And if we don't have a global platform that we support, then is it going to be pockets of different alliances that determine how they feel and what they think, which is what we're seeing in effect right now happening.
When you talk about peacekeeping troops, that's different from security guarantees?
Yeah, I mean, so they're supposed to protect the security guarantees,
Right.
but they have different means of doing so.
All right.
So I saw a number, when I was in Beirut this past summer, I mean, I saw a number of different peacekeeping troops in the airport when I was flying from Beirut to Amman. And it was just, it's a different, I just say it's a different level of protection that they're afforded.
I want to save time to get into Israel, Gaza, but I guess my last question on this, and then we're going to save time for questions at the end, is so what do you think happens next? You have the Alaska summit. You had the meetings on Monday. Based on news reports, maybe Putin has continued to up the game in terms of drone attacks and, you know, the things he might deny, and civilians are being killed. What happens next? And also, you know, how many people are dying a day while everybody tries to sit around and figure this out?
Yeah, so the number there's different numbers reported, but the majority of the different independent sources will say that around 13 to 14,000 Ukrainian civilians have been killed, and surprisingly, about 1,000 Russian civilians have been killed. And I say surprisingly because I think a lot of people think that number would be higher. But the number of Russian military that have been killed is significantly higher than the number of Ukrainian military that have been killed. So that's this piece of it. And then, I mean, not this piece of it, that's the death toll. And then I think we don't yet know what's going to happen. I think we can predict different scenarios, but it's not just a calculated one-dimensional interest that's taking place here. So there's a lot of different interests that are going into the matrix, you know, if you will. And so what I think a lot of European leaders are going back to think through right now is what levers can they pull with us in the United States to move us in a certain direction on this and our relationship with Putin as well. And so it's not just one thing. It's not only do we want to be besties do we want to be best friends with Putin and Russia and do away with Ukraine, but it's also just a kind of again increasing the price for us if we were to make that decision. And then that changes our own calculation, and different things are going on the other side too. And so this is this moment of influence that people are trying to, does that make sense? Are trying to put pressure on right now to influence us in making the decisions that we might be making and asking others to be making as well right now in this particular period.
All right, let's shift to Israel, Gaza, and then we'll come back to questions on Russia, Ukraine. Can you kind of give us your take on where things are right now? We've talked about both of these wars multiple times over the years, but
I feel like we need an intermission. But
yeah,
okay.
we might. But let's And then I also know that you have
water.
you have traveled recently, like you said, and so I do want you to be able to talk about some of the things that you've seen on the ground and when you've been over there. But where do things stand now with Israel in Gaza? What is the latest situation with the hostages and where that all is? And kind of where are we now, August 2025?
I don't think we're in a good place. So I'll start with that. And that's going to be like no news. That's not news to you, Sherlock. But I'm not going to curse in church. So.
You wouldn't be the first person.
Okay, so not to make a joke, but I would say I don't think we're in a good place. And I think that I increasingly felt that, felt the intensity when I was over there, and I just came back like 2 weeks ago. And I'm still finding the words to describe that experience of this past summer even, but I will just say that you have a record number of Israeli Jews who are now protesting against this war. So just this week, you had over 1 million people across the state of Israel who were saying, no, we do not want this anymore, and we are standing against Netanyahu and the Netanyahu government, and et cetera. You have 2 international organizations, Israeli organizations, that are now calling this a genocide. And you have over 100 international organizations calling this a genocide. I think it is a genocide. And I think that even by my saying that makes some people on edge. And I want us to explore that as well. If what I just said is making you feel uncomfortable, let's explore why it's making you feel uncomfortable, because I think we need to have that conversation. And I think we need to explore why we're uncomfortable with having that conversation. And if we're even having a conversation around if something is or is not a genocide, something bad is going on. Something bad is happening. We've taken a wrong turn. And I think so what we need to start saying is, how do we not continue down this road? And when I'm saying we, I mean U.S. resources being used to commit acts of violence against innocent souls who deserve life. And so I'll just state that, and that there are other options that we could be exploring than simply, again, just violence, life-threatening, life-ending violence, and also starving people. This conversation around whether or not starvation is happening or is not happening, starvation is happening. President Trump has also actually made a statement about that as well. And there are so many also, I would just say, people in our own country right now, who, including many, many Jewish Americans that I know, who are saying, we're not in my name, we're not okay with this. And also another thing, and the why it's important to have this conversation in this way, and that is, just last year, the president of France said that France was too late in calling what was happening in Rwanda a genocide, and it apologized to the Rwandan people for that. And so I'm a big believer in how do we learn from past mistakes so that we don't continue that. And that is a different conversation than the conversation about also how do we keep everybody safe, and how do we keep and respect everyone's dignity, and how do we make sure that we are adhering to principles that make our society by ourselves even modeling this, and that peace is possible. And so what is peace when we even say it? And that's so interesting about this word that we keep using, and that I don't want it to be a captured word. And I think it's important that we protect it and that we define it, and that we also have a conversation around what does peace mean and what do the terms of peace mean. If we are not yet in full agreement on what the terms mean, that doesn't mean we can't have a conversation about it, because how are we going to reach agreement if we refuse to even talk about it? So that's kind of where I am on all of that. And what I would say is we are not winning a lot of friends right now. And from my global travels, that is something that kept coming up for me. I've been traveling a lot, as you all know, since I was 3 years old. There are people who are they feel as if the United States is acting against our own interest. And not only as it relates to Israel, but also in a number of different ways. And they're confused by us. And they're saying, what is going on in the United States? And I think that and when people say that too, that gives me hope. And let me tell you why it gives me hope. Okay, you might say, like, this lady has lost her mind in Charles de Gaulle Airport, apparently. But where my now 2-year-old went on strike and wouldn't move, which is, sorry, I shouldn't make that joke either, but he did. But okay, so what I'm trying to say is, why it gives me hope, because they hold us to a higher standard. And because they believe in the American people still. And a lot of people will say some people will say they've given up on us. But I will say that, when someone's given up on you, they won't even ask, why are you doing this? A lot of times. And they actually were engaging in conversation, and we were having long conversations about what's happening in the American public in a way that was really interesting to me, about also some calculations on what the international media was reporting about us as well, that created miscalculations and misassumptions on other people's part as well, which is why, again, dialogue and cultural diplomacy, et cetera, I think becomes so critically important. But the other thing, too, is to say, it's like, we're just confused because there was the Iraq war that most of the international community disagreed with. And then there was this Obama promise in Egypt. And then there was all kinds of things that confused a lot of people during the Obama foreign policy years. And then Trump totally threw people off. And then Biden promised an international order and a reinstatement of an international order that got the United States back on a pre-Iraq track, if you will, of which the Afghanistan debacle of how we handled Afghanistan left, again, a lot of the international community just saying, like, what is going on? And can we trust the United States, along with the Iran deal that we negotiated in the Obama years, being torn up, and then going back to the table in Trump 2 to negotiate an Iran deal that then just got blown up again this summer. And so people are saying, which United States are we dealing with? What does our partner here at the table look like? Can it commit to? And will it back up? And what do the American people really think?
But isn't that the result of Democratic elections every 4 years, that the administrations change, people run on, we're not going to do what this current administration is doing, we're going to shift away? I mean, isn't that part of what happens when you have, turnover and one party wins and somebody else comes in? So I'm not.
I hear you, but I don't think that people in the second half of the 20th century were experiencing a politicization and of our foreign policy and national security systems as they have seen this century. And so, I mean, if you go back to Eisenhower, and I know we have a lot of people who read a lot about this era. If you look at Truman, Eisenhower, even Roosevelt, Kennedy, Nixon, et cetera, and you had Kissinger in the mix for a very long time as well. There was some predictability to how the United States was going to engage on the global stage.
Regardless of the president
and what deals we were going to respect as well.
And people feel like a lot of that is now gone. Or at least changing.
They're wondering, they're wondering if it's permanently gone. I think what people are saying is this the permanent new United States, or is there room here for shift? And if so, what does that look like? And where are the American people on this? And this just doesn't seem like it fits a lot of what, American culture is a huge export around the world. as well. I mean, you can't, most of the movie theaters that you go to in most parts of the world, I mean, this isn't, it are American-made movies, American-produced movies. The clothes that people are wearing, the economy. I mean, we are still the largest economy in the world. That influence is there. And so I think what people are looking for is to say, what does our future look like with this new United States? But what is the new United States?
So we did have one of our initial summits conversations was after October 7th.
Yeah.
One of the stated objectives at that time was to, rid out Hamas. Where is Hamas today? How strong or damaged is it? What's the current status of Hamas and Hamas's leadership?
Well, I think from what the numbers are showing, if they're accurate, is that I would say it's that it's declined by 50%. Okay, in terms of militants. Now, if you look at what I would say is this, and what I've been saying before October 7th as well, consistently on this, is that Palestinian people need elections. And let us believe in the electoral process and allow for a civil society to develop in a healthy way and where people are able to make decisions that actually, and we're having this conversation right here in America right now too, that are going to help them rather than hurt them. And so what I think I would say where a lot of Palestinians are right now is to say, okay, what does the future look like? I can keep going back to that question right now. And Palestinians would say, you want to have a conversation about Hamas. Can we have a conversation about the future of Palestinian people? And what does it look like? And not all Palestinian people are Hamas.
At this point, what is Netanyahu's stated objective for what still needs to happen? A different way to put the question that we posed it a while back. What does victory look like? Many people would say, okay, at what point is it enough? What does victory look like according to Netanyahu?
Well, I mean, the thing that Netanyahu continues to say is to eliminate Hamas. How do you define Hamas? So I had this conversation just yesterday with somebody, and now it's going to get really personal. But I will get very personal. And what I would say there is this. Hamas affiliates itself with the Muslim Brotherhood. I met with a couple years ago, Muslim Brotherhood expert on the Muslim Brotherhood at a university, U.S. university, who told me based on his research that almost all Muslims were a part of the Muslim Brotherhood. And I said, so I'm Muslim. Do you consider me to be a part of the Muslim Brotherhood? And he said, well, you might be and not know it. And I started looking for the exit.
Yeah. Right.
But the reason I'm saying that is that if you have that definition, you justify killing me. I'm not okay with that. I'm really not okay with that. And I'll also go one step, I'll also give another example. I was just in Beirut, for example, and there were targeted assassinations happening. And I'm a lawyer, trained in the United States. And I'm thinking to myself, due process of law. Who's making the determination that the people who are in that car should be killed? And what if somebody makes the determination that me and my family should be killed? That's terrifying. And there are things I also experienced there, and you can hear a difference in my voice because it's personal, because it's a personal safety consideration here that I just experienced, and that it becomes very, very real. And it's then when you're sitting there and I can't tell you how many times when I saw malnourished children, and I looked and I thought, why can't we invest in another way here? This is a beautiful place on the Mediterranean. We could do so much good, and we are being basically choked held by a number of different conflict profiteers here, including not only war criminals, but also, I'd say, crime syndicates that are also happening. And so on that personal side of what I'm trying to say is that when there are things I can't, because I know that I'm being recorded here, I can't even say that I experienced because it would put my family at risk to say it, and maybe even potentially me. So when sometimes people say you're very close to the issue, yeah, I'm not going to deny that. But it also I live in this very interesting space of the professional and the personal. And you can always take and say, well, it's this lived personal bias. And I would say, because I was asked one time this was before the war in Ukraine, by a Russian student at Belmont, if I had bias. And I said, I'm sure I have American bias too. Yes, most of the information that I receive is in English and is through American media channels and social media channels as well. Yes, that is forming and that is shaping my opinion. And that goes back to this First Amendment. That is our First Amendment for a reason. And that is, we have to be able to have this dialogue and these conversations, even when it makes us feel uncomfortable, even when we're in disagreement, because that's part of the magic formula and sauce that I think helps us get to better decision making. So I get really nervous when we start trying to cancel each other, shut down dialogue,
Yep.
And et cetera.
Yeah, and that's not the answer. You know, that's something I'm proud of. Our church has been doing this for years because it's important.
Yeah.
And not everybody in here is going to agree, and not everybody in here is going to feel comfortable. But
Yeah.
we do it because it matters.
Yeah.
In a world where a lot of people won't do it, and echo chambers are very dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you just really quickly, when we landed in Beirut, airport, we needed help with the stroller because the electricity goes out all the time. And the elevator wasn't working and the escalator wasn't working. And one of the security guards at the airport handed me his walkie-talkie to help us with our luggage. And I took it. And it was a sobering experience, because I thought to myself, what did I just do? Mm-hmm. Even thinking about taking a walkie-talkie that could, because a lot of the pagers and these electronic devices were what were used to kill people in Beirut a couple of months ago. And I just thought to myself, did I just put me and my family at risk by just doing something that I would so casually do if somebody was going to be helping me at an airport in the United States? And I'll just state this as well. Some people think that what's happening in the Middle East right now and what's happening in Russia and Ukraine are so far away that it's not going to affect or impact us in the same way. I think it's going to inform modern day warfare. I think the rules of the quote unquote war game, if you want to use that term, are being set in motion right now. Before it's too late, I think what we do need to have a heavy hand in is on what are the ethics and the principles and the rules of modern day warfare, given such technological advancements that will affect all of us, because we have chosen convenience in many ways through technological advancements, which make it make it much easier to be able to surveil us, and not only to surveil us, to be able to target us with violence if one so chooses.
You've been my friend for a long time, and one of the things that I love and respect about you is your commitment to the dialogue, your commitment to peace, your commitment to diplomacy. Before we open it up to questions, do you have any kind of concluding thoughts about diplomacy, about how either one of these situations moves forward, about how Americans should think about how we approach the dialogue, how we think about the issues, how we process the news when it comes to issues of diplomacy and peacemaking?
I think if we do away with diplomacy, what becomes of our democratic norms that we hold in such high regard? And so if we don't, I almost like ask it in a different way, which is like, if we no longer believe that diplomacy works, what are we believing in? What are we subscribing to? What are we choosing over it? And that's kind of terrifying because, again, I keep talking about a third way. And what I mean by like another way, another option than saying the only way we're going to resolve our differences is by me killing you or you killing me or through violence. That's terrifying. And to what end? So what does the actual end game look like to that? And if we can't define that, what is it that we're opting into? So I think that what some of our European colleagues are telling us right now is this period of time, whether we like it or not, with who is our president, this period of time is going to potentially determine the future of diplomacy and peacemaking and modern day warfare for the next 25 to 30 years. The stakes are high. And I think that what's really been interesting in terms of watching all of this unfold as well is where the Democratic Party is coming out on some of these issues right now, and also where the Republican Party is debating these issues right now too. So I've been really surprised, for example, I don't know if some of you have watched Tucker Carlson's interviews lately, or Marjorie Taylor Greene, and of where there's been a lot of people, there's been division of people who voted for Trump around these issues in ways of where you have a lot of people who are typically at odds with each other who are now saying, what does diplomacy look like? What does peace look like in ways that hold up our American values? But then, and I'll just say this, I think, is it okay for one to say one thing on one issue and then to inconsistently veer from those values on other issues? And so this is a values-based conversation, which is why also I think it's so great that it's happening right here in a church, and your book that you wrote as well. I mean, these are the questions that you're asking us to ask ourselves so that we can, and that I think feeds into, if we can agree on some key values that are American values, and we hold strong on that, regardless of the issue, we might be able to get back on a more steady track than the one that we're on right now. And we might inspire and take a little bit of air out of the balloon right now globally that allows for a de-escalation environment to happen, an authorizing environment for true peace rather than an authorizing environment for warfare.
All right, I want to save some time for questions, so Jay's got the microphone. I'm gonna go to him, and again, just if you have a question, please make it a question and keep it on the shorter side.
Statement.
So the first question is, a lot of us feel anxiety, I think, because the things that you're describing are based on the actions of high-level actors.
Right.
And so I'm really curious, when have you received any emails or read news or conversations that you have been made hopeful about grassroots movements in places like Russia or Ukraine or Europe, where apart from the headlines that we read, there actually are people trying to create pockets of dialogue and conversation that could possibly be defining?
I think it's happening all over the world. I don't think there's a country that's not happening in right now. And the question that everybody's trying to figure out is how to have influence on current leaders who have a lot of power. So what does that mechanism actually look like? And I think that's what people are struggling with, because they do feel like it's bigger than something that they can influence. And but I will say, like, that's where you see 1 million people in Israel protesting right now, and saying also you have at least 25, their numbers are 25 to 50 hostages who might still be alive. And people are saying you could potentially save their lives and a lot of Palestinian lives as well. And so, but how to impact the decision maker? And I think that's a global conversation that's happening, that we're even having right now in our country as well. Is like how to influence and impact people who are making the decisions.
Thank you. Yes, over here. Here you go.
What can you tell us about the internal politics inside of Russia? What's the common man on the street? Is there a big push anti-Putin? Is there what are the oligarchs? Where do they fall into this?
Well, I think a lot of the oligarchs are benefiting from this. And so, and also what is the information that a lot of Russian people who are living there are receiving as well? So I get the sense that there's a lot of support for Putin. I could be wrong on that, but that's what I've read. That's the sense I get, etc. But if they knew different information, they might think differently.
Messaging is highly controlled there, right?
Right.
I mean, so they're controlling that closely.
Right, but I also know that they're tired of war.
Right.
A lot of Russians are tired of war. And so they're just like, and are tired of being isolated, and the economy's not doing well. And so a lot of people are feeling that they don't want to be making the sacrifices that they're also being asked to make.
Right, here we go.
On the Ukraine-Russian war, first let me say it's hard for me to imagine anybody who's right-thinking could imagine that there's anything other than Russia attacking Ukraine. And I'm personally embarrassed the United States is not doing more to help the Ukrainians. But might it be the case that Trump has accomplished something? And I think what this is, I'm pretty sure it was the Prime Minister of Poland who said, does it make any sense for 450 million Europeans to depend upon 330 million Americans to protect us from 150 million Russians?
Yeah, I heard that too. Yeah, sure. And I think going back to the point of what you're saying too is, and the point that was made over here, what is it that people around the world are asking for? Most people I hear are asking for freedom across the board. And there is this tension between a group of people who are wanting to control for a whole host of reasons, and people who are saying, I just want to be free. I want to be free to make my own decisions. I want to be free to live my life. I want a good education for my children. I want health care. I want to live as long a life as I possibly can for the most part, and I want to enjoy it. I want to travel a little bit. And this is what I hear consistently, and I want to feel safe. I want to feel safe as I do that. And so that's the world that a lot of people want. So when I answer your question about diplomacy, I'm thinking, how do we negotiate, going back to negotiation peace deals, that provide that?
I've got so many questions, but let me throw three quick ones at you, and you can pick and choose. Number one, we hear it said that the Ukrainian Constitution says no land can be given up. I mean, does that hold? And unless the Ukrainian people, Zelensky, unless they agree to it, other forces can't take up their land. Secondly, if the war continues to fight out, you mentioned the Russian economy is weak. How about the Russian army? I hear people say, that they're not that strong and that it wouldn't play out well. Other people say, no, it's the opposite. And the third thing I'll throw real quick is you mentioned about Putin, how he was humiliated, when the Soviet Union fell apart and the Russian lost its place in the world. Is he determined to replace that whole thing in your estimation? And if he wins Ukraine, is he going to keep going until he restores former Soviet Union states into one country? And if he achieved that, then people think, well, he continuously takes over the world.
Well, that's what a lot of people in Poland are saying as well, and Europeans are saying as well. And they're saying if you don't hold him here, his appetite is much larger than Ukraine. And so is this not a slippery slope? And Europe's going to be the one that's the most impacted here. So that's the argument. I mean, that's not just even the argument. That's the fear. And I think that's a potential scenario. That is a potential scenario. How likely it is, I think we need to talk to some military experts in terms of answering exactly that question that you're asking with regards to the strength of the Russian army and the appetite. But they're drafting people. And et cetera, but they also have, and both sides, and I mentioned this before, are having an issue with people not wanting to fight that they're asking to fight in this war. And you have to answer your question with regards to about Putin being humiliated and all of that. I think that's also what in part Trump is trying to play into, is that ego, and maybe because he understands that very well, in terms of seeing like how and what can be leveraged from that. But again, I don't think we know all the details yet about the deal making that's going on in the background, and the terms of that. And with regards to the Ukrainian constitution, I think that we would need to ask Peter Pomerantsev, who's a colleague that I work closely with, he's half Russian, half Ukrainian, and he's an expert on the Ukrainian parliament, and we could call him up or have him come speak a little bit more about how this would all play out in through the Ukrainian political system.
Do you think Putin is amazed that, one, it's gone on this long and that he's lost the number of troops that he has? Or do you think, based on what he saw with Crimea, with the Red Line, I mean, do you think it, because we talked about that initially, like, oh, this could go fast and he can get to Kyiv, and, you know, here we are 3.5 years later, and Ukraine has put up a fight with a lot of money and support from the West. And some would say that there needs to be more. But do you think that he's dumbfounded by it, and also so far in that, you know, he's all in?
Well, again, I don't know what he's thinking, but what I think he's probably not as surprised as you might think.
I'm glad your travels were safe.
Thank you.
Glad you're back. Across my news feed yesterday, I saw something that said Hamas had accepted a ceasefire agreement. And this has come up before. And whenever it does come up and it breaks down, Witkoff or the Israelis are basically saying that Hamas is not accepting a ceasefire agreement. What is it? Is it the Israelis who won't accept a ceasefire, or is it the powers that be there?
I think a lot of Israelis and Palestinian people want a ceasefire, and that's what I would say. And I think a lot of, and I think that there's a lot of exhaustion with, again, there's a common theme running through here, and those are the people who are in positions of power that are claiming to represent, and some who are claiming to represent the majority will of people that they share an identity with, are not negotiating and are not agreeing to what many people that are in that geographic location and space and area want. And so I think that this gets to, I keep going back to this, but 1 million people rallying, which is a significant percentage of the population, it seems to me that you have a prime minister who's going against what a lot of people are wanting, and that, I hear this too, people are wondering again, why is the United States in this type of a relationship with Netanyahu? And I think we need to have that conversation as well. Like, Netanyahu has been in this leadership position for almost 25 years, again, almost a quarter of a century. So.
All right, we got maybe one more and then we'll wind down. Yeah.
Well, that was almost my question. Why the lockstep between Israel and Netanyahu's policy in particular? But now the West Bank, even today, the right wing, which really is controlling a lot of the parliament, I guess, right now, at least has the power to keep the coalition together, in Israel, has approved, the parliament has approved the new development that's essentially going to, in their words, prohibit a two-state solution. And so, facts on the ground in the West Bank, and if that's not really been a secret from Likud or Netanyahu for a long time, and since they have so much power to do that, what's going to happen there? I mean, we have 148 states, 148 countries who now believe in a two-state and endorse, especially just recently, the UK, Canada, France, a two-state solution. Is there an alternative way? And how's that play out? Because Netanyahu's saying, Hamas and the Gaza's got to be demilitarized. And that makes a certain amount of sense given what's happened. But, this is really fast moving. And I think Likud and the far right are trying to take advantage of Trump being in power because of this, what you just mentioned, the lockstep, no questions. So what do you think about all that?
Well, and it wasn't only that with Trump, because there was a lot of that under Biden as well. And so, to be fair, and I think to a lot of people's surprise, but the American people and the American public have moved on this issue significantly over the past several years as well. So what I would say is, I think we need to go back to, I'm a broken record now, but values and principles. So if we were to articulate what are our American values and our American principles, and what is our policy making going to look like around based on those values and principles. So let me give a very specific example. Is one of our values going to be due process of law? Is one of our values going to be to exhaust all means of diplomacy? And we can argue about historic. We can argue about the first half of the 20th century, which didn't include the infrastructure that we have been investing in and setting up for the past 80 years as well. And so given that infrastructure and et cetera, are we going to try to exhaust decision-making that saves as many lives as possible because that's the American way? And the American way is also about prioritizing safety and security for everybody so that people can live as much of a prosperous life as possible in the name of dignity, innovation, collaboration. I'll give you an example. I was at St. Jude's Hospital on Monday in Memphis. I have the honor of being on their leadership board. It's an incredible institution. That's a global institution that prioritizes collaboration around the world. And they're able to cure many types of cancer because of that collaboration that happens. And it's happening in Tennessee, and it was started in Tennessee, and it was started by Americans, and et cetera. That's a vision. Everybody laughed at Danny Thomas when he first had that idea that he wanted to do that. And they have decreased the rates of children dying from leukemia by, I want to say 90-something%. And it was an idea. And this is the land of ideas. And again, so I'm just kind of keep coming back to that. This is this moment to say, if these are our values and our freedom and equality and et cetera, then therefore let's have a conversation around what we are going to invest in from a state-based solution in the Holy Land that is dependent upon our resources. Does that make sense? So, we have negotiating power as well, especially because it's our resources.
Right. All right, we got time for one more, and we're going to close it down. So one more back there.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything mentioned about the media, role of the media. For instance, in regard to Russia, it isn't mentioned at all that for Russia, it's an existential threat. I mean, Chinese coming to Canada or Mexico would make America the same way, act the same way. Now, the same thing happens in Palestine. The issue was framed as Hamas, and that just was the end of it. In other words,
yeah, I hear you. I hear what you're saying.
And then the same thing someone was mentioning about civil societies coming together, which could have solved Russia-Ukraine conflict because the people would have come together. But third parties have tended to exploit that situation to a point that after 3.5 years, 1.5 million people have died and all this destruction. So where's the media? It's almost like an extension of the foreign policy establishment.
Well, I have a lot of thoughts on the media. I think we need a longer conversation for that. I'm not trying to shut down your question.
We can't do that tonight.
But
yeah, right.
It's an important question,
right.
That narrative frame. Who's framing the narrative
right.
that we're even having a conversation around? And that's what I hear you saying. And it's being oversimplified. And sometimes it's just, in some situations, it's just wrong. Right. It's just factually wrong.
Yeah. And where are people going to to get their information, to get their news, to get their statistics, and all the outlets are slanted a certain way. And so we could dive into that.
Just to offer some language on that, if I may, it's dismiss it if you don't want to use it, but I call it the information ecosystem. And so what's polluting the information ecosystem, and how do we also deal with that pollution? So like disinformation and et cetera. But like, this is part of the reason that there's also so much distrust.
Right.
We're all fragmented in terms of the different media outlets that we're receiving information from, which is shaping our opinion on all of this.
I want to thank all of you for coming tonight. Thanks to those watching online. I am going to close in prayer as well, but let's hear for Samar Ali, and thank her for being here tonight.
Thank you so much.
Talk about these difficult issues. So,
Thank you.
Thank you. Let me say a prayer, and then I know she'll hang around for a few minutes, but again, thanks for coming. Let's close in prayer. Loving God, as Christians, Jesus taught peace, and so we believe in peace. So we come here tonight to talk about these issues that have been going on for a long time, different perspectives, different ideologies, and we pray for peace. And we pray that those who are in power in multiple nations can collaborate together to work towards peace. Thank you for Samar Ali, her insight, her willingness to be with us. We pray for peace as we leave tonight in Christ's name. Amen. Thanks, everybody.
It will hurt no more. Though this world is full of suffering, these promises are true. We hold